James Corbett of CorbettReport.com, and this is your Sunday update for the 27th day of June 2010. And now for the real news. In the news this week, the G8 conference in Toronto has just wrapped up and the G20 conference is now underway. As predicted by many analysts, mainstream media coverage is almost completely centered on protests outside the event, with no interviews of any of the actual protesters, no analysis of their concerns, and no background or contextualizing information about the grievances with the G20 and their agenda of austerity in the name of paying off private international bankers for loans which those very bankers created out of thin air. One scene in particular that has garnered airtime on almost all mainstream media outlets is the image of a burning police car in Toronto, presumably set ablaze by protesters. As unedited CNN footage of the blaze reveals, however, the scene was notable for the complete lack of police presence long after the blaze had started.
I don't see any police officers here at all unless they are behind the ring of demonstrators, but absolutely no sign of any police unless they're not in uniform. There is looks like now a police officer is there beside him. We'll go back to the car and show you it's still burning. No sign of any police or fire department. Don't even hear a siren.
Given the $1.3 billion that Canadian taxpayers have been forced to spend on security operations for the event, including the deployment of 10,000 uniformed police officers, 1,000 security guards, and several army units, many analysts are suggesting that the scene may have been left to garner attention and help the media portray protesters as violent extremists. If this is the case, it would not be the first time that scenes of violence have been allowed to get out of control by police forces looking to justify the totalitarian clampdown on political dissent. At the G20 in London last April, a tiny group of masked individuals who the media identified as protesters stage-managed a carefully contrived smashing of the windows of the Royal Bank of Scotland for a gaggle of press photographers, who in fact overwhelmingly outnumbered the so-called protesters without a policeman in sight. In 2008, the Denver Post reported that undercover Denver police, dressed as protesters, had instigated a struggle with uniformed police that resulted in 106 people being arrested and an indiscriminate pepper spray attack against the assembled crowds. In 2007, the Austerity de Quebec admitted that 3 masked protesters at the SPP summit in Montebello, Quebec, had in fact been policemen who were dressed as anarchists and deployed to incite a violent struggle with police forces.
No. Put the rock down, man! You're a fucking cop, the 3 of you! Go on, it's our line! These 3 guys are cops, everybody!
As we confirmed yesterday, the 3 people in question were indeed suited Quebec police officers performing their duties.
At a Toronto Town Hall press conference earlier this year, Dan Dix of pressfortruth.ca had the chance to ask Toronto Police Constable George Tucker about the possibility of police using Agent Provocateur at this year's G20.
In 2007, there was a summit that was held in Montebello, Quebec, where 3 Sûreté de Quebec police officers were caught as Agent Provocateurs. They were dressed as aggressive protesters with rocks in their hands in an attempt to incite violence. George, as a representative of the Toronto Police, can you assure us that the Toronto Police Force will not engage in any police provocateur agent activities at the G20 summit?
Other matters, security matters, I'm not at liberty to discuss those in an open format.
Completely unreported on mainstream media outlets are examples of informed, non-violent, non-cooperative dissent against the takeover of the Western world by financial oligarchical interests. Earlier this week, Dan Dix of pressfortruth.ca and Charlie Veitch of the London-based Love Police took to the streets of Toronto to engage in just such dissent.
Thank you all for believing that terrorism was real. We have kept you terrified, stupid, and confused for the last 10 years, since September the 11th. We promise you it had nothing to do with the American, Israeli, or British governments. Oh no. If anyone tries to tell you those theories, punch them in the face. What you need to do is only trust the corporate-controlled propaganda channels of the mainstream media. The people in the nice black and white uniforms behind me that say security, they are asking us, do not point your camera at the building, because the building has feelings as well, and it's very shy today.
On Friday, the media finally, and for the first time, reported that Canadian laws have in fact been changed specifically for the G20 to require citizens to identify themselves to police upon request anywhere within 5 meters of the fenced-off zone around the downtown core of Toronto. Other arbitrary rules that are now being enforced by Toronto police include random, unannounced checkpoints, where police are claiming authority to perform searches and illegal confiscations of private property in public spaces without reasonable cause, in direct violation of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
Now, on whose authority are you able to illegally search my bag? On whose authority?
We've explained already, sir.
No, you haven't explained. You haven't explained at all. How is this end of discussion? It's a legal search. Unless I'm detained or arrested, you cannot search my bag in a public park.
You have a right to enter the public space under the terms that we've given you. That's the end.
Oh, your legal terms that you've given me.
Well, sir, I guess that's up for debate later, but today, right now, as it stands, those are the rules, and if we are incorrect, and it's found out to be incorrect, then we will apologize profusely, and it goes from there.
Oh, so you just do whatever you want to and deal with it later.
That's not the case.
That's just what, no, that's exactly what you said to me.
Well, anyway,
that is
like
exactly what you said to me. That is exactly what you said to me. How is it over? These are my rights. These are my rights as a citizen. I can enter a public space at any point I want to without my rights being violated. And you're telling me if I want to enter into this park, my rights will be violated. As a citizen. And you're going to deal with the consequences later.
Charlie Veitch of the Love Police was arrested on Thursday for failing to provide his name to Toronto police when he was arbitrarily detained during his peaceful activities.
Alright everyone, so as you probably just saw, we were surrounded by, I don't know, about 15 police officers or so who said we could not be on the property and that we had to be on the public sidewalk. We went over to the public sidewalk, continued doing our bullhorning with Charlie Veitch, and that's when they said it's time to put a stop to this and you guys are going to have to tell us who you are and show us your identification under something that is called the Public Protection Act. Which one of the officers said is rarely used, but they brought it out for this particular occasion. So Charlie Veitch has been detained. He is currently being processed inside of Union Station here, and we're going to stick around and make sure that he gets out okay.
The new and arbitrary powers have also been extended to the borders, where citizen media from the United States, including members of We Are Change New York, were refused entry into Canada unless they could provide special dispensation from the FBI. Dispensation that the FBI says doesn't exist.
Now we got to get an impossible document, a disposition from the FBI that the FBI says doesn't exist in order to enter Canada, not even now, but within the next 10 years. So for the next 10 years, if I want to enter Canada, I got to get a document that's impossible to get. Because I filed the Freedom of Information Act with the FBI, with my name, and they wrote me back a letter stating, oh, we don't have no documents with Luke Radowski at all, no. Then we go here, custom agents come out and only say, oh, we have your FBI report sheet here. It says you're arrested questioning Michael Mayer Bloomberg, weren't you? It's like, yeah, but those charges are being dropped as we speak. They're like, yeah, we don't care. You're not allowed into Canada.
Meanwhile, inside the conference, the so-called leaders of the so-called free world are meeting to formalize agreements that have already been made in events like the Bilderberg Conference held earlier this month in Sitges, Spain, and the Trilateral Commission meeting held last month in Dublin, Ireland, both events being completely ignored by all mainstream media outlets. Inside, the US seems to be holding out for a position of continued Keynesian stimulus spending to keep the disintegrating Anglo-American financial world order continuing in its current long-term slow-motion collapse, and the Europeans and Canadians are arguing for drastic austerity measures to ensure a swift and controlled demolition of the current economic paradigm, like the demolition of World Trade Center Building 7 on September 11, 2001. Analysts note that in either event, the ultimate intention is to move the world toward the bolstering of regional and global financial institutions with the powers to set policies and laws within individual nations and to create a de facto world government of bankers. Earlier this week, Bob Chapman of the International Forecaster joined the Corbett Report to discuss the deliberations at this year's G20.
They'll be paying that debt off, and they will be in a quasi-depression for 20 to 30 years. It's not worth it. And besides, the bankers who created the money out of thin air, who lent it to them, should have never lent it to them in the first place because they knew of their dire financial condition 30 years ago, never mind the last 10 years. And so I think that that's going to be the biggest issue at the meeting there. And it's going to be a knockdown, drag-out fight.
Now stay tuned to CorbettReport.com for episode 135 of the Corbett Report podcast, Know Your Toxins, Sodium Fluoride, where we talk to Dr. Paul Conant of the Fluoride Action Network and Dr. William Hersey, former EPA scientist, about the dangers of fluoride.